The warmth of the Georgia sun bathed Michael Carter's backyard in golden light as he reclined on his lounge chair, eyes closed, savoring the quiet hum of summer. It was a moment of well-earned peace, one he had fought for through years of late-night shifts, long overtime hours, and careful saving. Owning a home like this had once been an impossible dream for his parents, but for Michael it was now a reality. A stunning two-story house in an upscale Atlanta neighborhood, complete with a shimmering pool that reflected the cloudless sky above. After 15 years of... But just as he allowed himself to exhale, the sharp wail of sirens shattered the tranquility. His body tensed before his mind could process it, a reflex ingrained from years on the force. The screech of tires against pavement sent a ripple of unease through him as two patrol cars stopped abruptly at his front gate. His fingers tightened around the armrests of his chair as uniformed officers stepped out, hands resting near their holsters. Michael sat up, a familiar knot forming in his stomach. Suspicious individual? In his backyard? His? He had no... Michael took a steadying breath, suppressing the surge of frustration bubbling beneath the surface. He had dealt with people like her before, people who believed their privilege was a shield against accountability. But she had underestimated him. As he stood meeting the officer's gaze, a quiet determination settled in his chest. He had worked too hard to let someone like Karen rewrite the narrative of his life. This was his home, this was his moment, and no one, especially not her, was going to take it from him. The day Michael Carter moved into his new home should have been one of pure joy. After 15 years of service as a police officer, years of careful saving and countless overtime shifts, he had finally done what his parents could only dream of, buying a beautiful home in one of Atlanta's most prestigious neighborhoods. As he unloaded furniture onto his patio, he took a deep breath, feeling the weight of his accomplishment. The house was perfect, meticulously maintained by its previous owners, and the backyard pool was the centerpiece of it all, a glistening, serene reminder of how far he had come. But his moment of satisfaction was short-lived. As he adjusted his lounge chairs, a strange sensation prickled at the back of his neck, the distinct feeling of being watched. He turned his gaze upward and, sure enough, saw a woman standing at the second-floor window of the house next door, phone pressed against her ear. Her eyes were locked onto him, unblinking, as if she were studying an anomaly that didn't belong. Michael, always one to extend kindness first, lifted a hand in greeting, but the woman, Karen Thompson, did not return the courtesy. Instead, she disappeared behind the curtain, her presence vanishing as swiftly as it had appeared. The next day, while Michael was out running errands, his phone buzzed with a security camera alert. Frowning, he pulled up the live feed, and what he saw made his jaw tighten. There she was, Karen, waltzing through his unlocked back gate as if she owned the place. Draped in an expensive swimsuit, a designer towel in hand, she sauntered over to his pool, casually setting her things on a chair before dipping her feet into the water. Michael hurried home, heart pounding, not from fear, but from the sheer audacity of it all. As he stepped onto his patio, she looked up, feigning surprise, a hand pressed against her chest. "Oh," she gasped, voice dripping with faux innocence. "I thought you were the new pool maintenance guy. The previous owners always let me use their pool." Michael clenched his jaw but forced himself to remain calm. Years of police training had taught him the value of restraint. "Ma'am, I'm not the maintenance man, I'm the new owner," he said, his voice firm but polite. "And I would appreciate it if you ask permission before entering my property." Karen's expression twisted into something unreadable. Shock, disbelief, maybe even defiance. Then after a beat, she let out a nervous laugh. "You? The owner?" she scoffed, eyes raking over him as if searching for a lie. "There must be some mistake. I know the realtor handling this property, and she never mentioned..." She trailed off, gesturing vaguely at him, leaving the racist implication unspoken but deafeningly clear. Michael inhaled deeply, steadying himself. He had heard this tone before, seen this disbelief in people's eyes. "There's no mistake, Mrs. Thompson," he said evenly. "This is my home, and you are trespassing. Please leave." As Karen gathered her things, her smile faltered. Then, just as she passed him, she muttered under her breath, her words low but unmistakable. "We'll see about that." It wasn't just a remark, it was a threat. And Michael knew, in that moment, that this was only the beginning. The peaceful Saturday morning air was filled with the gentle rustling of trees, the distant chirping of birds, and laughter? Splashes? Michael Carter furrowed his brow as he stirred from sleep. Something wasn't right. He glanced at the clock. 8:30 a.m. He wasn't expecting guests. Pushing aside his bedroom curtain, his stomach twisted at the sight below. There, in his backyard in his pool, Karen Thompson and 4 of her friends lounged comfortably, drinks in hand, as if they owned the place. Sunlight shimmered on the water, but all Michael could see was the sheer audacity rippling across its surface. Taking a deep breath, he stepped outside. "Ladies," he called, his voice even but firm, "you need to leave immediately. This is private property." Karen turned, her sunglasses slipping down her nose as she flashed an exasperated smile. "Oh, don't be difficult, Michael," she drawled, waving a dismissive hand. "We're just having a little fun. Besides, this pool barely gets any use." Her friends shifted uncomfortably in their designer swimsuits, sensing the tension. One of them leaned over and whispered, "Karen said she had permission." Michael's patience was razor thin, but he refused to let his temper dictate his actions. He folded his arms, jaw tight. "Mrs. Thompson, this is your final warning. The next time you trespass, I'm calling the police." Karen let out a scoff, standing up with deliberate slowness. "Go ahead," she sneered. "I know everyone at the precinct. My husband plays golf with Captain Richards." Her words slithered into the air, heavy with entitlement. But Michael had spent 15 years in law enforcement. He knew bluffs when he heard them. That afternoon he installed additional security cameras he had learned a long time ago document everything. Within days his cameras caught Karen testing the gate, peering through his windows, and even attempting to use an old key she had from the previous owners. Then came the final insult. One evening after a long day, Michael returned home to find not just Karen, but 8 women sprawled across his patio, drinking wine and discussing novels, as if they had booked a private resort. This time, he called the police. When officers arrived, Karen turned on the tears. "He's harassing us," she cried. "We've always had access to this pool." But Michael's former colleagues knew the truth. "Ma'am," one of them said, shaking his head, "Mr. Carter was one of our best officers. If he says you're trespassing, you're trespassing." As Karen left, her face flushed with humiliation, she spat a final threat. "This isn't over." Michael, watching her go, knew one thing for sure. It most certainly was. The monthly HOA meeting was in full swing when Karen Thompson stood up, smoothing the front of her pristine blazer. Her voice, saccharine yet laced with a familiar condescension, rang through the room. "I'm deeply concerned about property values," she announced, her gaze flickering. "Just briefly, toward Michael Carter. Some recent changes in the neighborhood have made potential buyers uncomfortable." Michael didn't flinch. He had expected this. It was Karen's last-ditch effort, a final move in her relentless campaign against him. Ever since she had been forced out of his backyard, she had taken her hostility to a new level. Anonymous complaints about his lawn, false accusations of suspicious activity on the community Facebook page, and even the petty theft of his morning newspaper. But this was a public attack wrapped in coded language designed to cast him as the problem. Slowly he rose from his seat, calm, collected, and then he pulled out his phone. "Interesting you should mention property values, Mrs. Thompson," he said, voice even. "Would you like to explain this?" He tapped the screen and the room fell silent as the security footage played. There, in crisp clarity, was Karen, sprinkling plant killer on his garden under the cover of night. The timestamp blinked like a damning signature. Tuesday, 11:47 p.m. A collective murmur rippled through the room. Karen's face drained of color. "I was checking for suspicious activity," she blurted, her voice shrill. Michael tilted his head. "And now we all know who that someone is." Silence. Then a shift. The weight of Karen's lies crashed down, her influence crumbling before her eyes. For the first time, she had nowhere left to hide. Michael Carter stood by his pool, staring at the soapy bubbles floating across its once pristine surface. The smell of dish detergent lingered in the warm Georgia air, the latest in a long list of petty attacks orchestrated by Karen Thompson. She had called the police on him, spread false rumors, vandalized his property, and now she had sabotaged his pool. A lesser man might have lost his temper. But Michael? He just smiled. If Karen wanted to play games with his pool, he would give her exactly what she wanted, with a little twist. That evening he sat down at his desk, scrolling through old notes from his police days. Then he remembered a case involving a special non-toxic dye used by pool maintenance companies. It was harmless, completely safe, except for one little quirk. It only activated upon contact with specific chemicals found in high-end sunscreens and luxury cosmetics, the exact brands Karen and her friends loved to slather on before their unauthorized dips. Perfect. Michael did his research. He tested a small sample in a bucket, adding a drop of the very sunscreen Karen had left behind on his pool chair weeks ago. Within seconds, the water turned a bright, unmistakable green. Not harmful, not permanent, just incredibly embarrassing. By the time Saturday arrived, Michael had everything in place. Through the neighborhood grapevine, he heard Karen boasting about her upcoming exclusive gathering, another unauthorized pool party at his home. That morning, Michael made sure she saw him leave, car packed for the day. But instead of driving far, he parked just around the corner and slipped back into his house through the side gate. At exactly 2 p.m., his security app pinged. Right on schedule. Karen and her entourage waltzed into his backyard, champagne in hand, setting up their little scene like seasoned invaders. "What the new owner doesn't know won't hurt him," Karen quipped, laughing. One by one they entered the water, their expensive sunscreen melting into the chemically treated pool. And then, "Karen, is your skin looking different?" The first scream shattered the air, then another. Panic erupted as Karen and her friends clawed at their arms, their normally flawless skin morphing into a vibrant shade of green. Michael, watching from his home office, leaned back in his chair, phone in hand, recording every glorious second. Sometimes the best way to handle a bully wasn't to fight fire with fire. It was to let karma do the work, with a little help. Karen Thompson never saw it coming. The moment she and her friends stumbled out of Michael Carter's backyard, dripping wet and glowing an unmistakable shade of green, they knew something was terribly wrong. The elegant poolside gathering she had so smugly orchestrated had turned into a disaster of epic proportions. "My skin, what's happening?" Karen shrieked, staring at her arms in horror. Under the afternoon sun, the chemical reaction was undeniable. Their once pristine complexions were now an outrageous shade of emerald. "I have a wedding next week," one woman wailed, frantically scrubbing at her now lime-green legs. Another gasped as streaks of green dripped down her face, mixing with expensive foundation and mascara. But the true moment of reckoning came when Karen's wild eyes locked onto one of Michael's security cameras. A tiny red light blinked back at her, its silent presence spelling out the inevitable. This was all on tape. What followed was nothing short of legendary. 6 green-tinted women, clutching their designer bags and towels, sprinted through the neighborhood, leaving a trail of wet footprints on the pavement. Some tried to cover their faces, others simply ran for their lives, their screams echoing down the street like a bizarre St. Patrick's Day parade gone wrong. And Michael, he was ready. That night he sat at his desk, carefully compiling the footage. The video practically edited itself. Clips of Karen's repeated trespassing, her smug declarations about knowing everyone at the precinct, and then the pièce de résistance, her and her friend's mortified escape, set perfectly to the same smooth jazz music they had been playing at his pool. With one click, he uploaded it. By morning, the video had exploded. From neighborhood gossip to national sensation. It started locally. The neighborhood WhatsApp group lit up like fireworks, residents buzzing with reactions. "Did you see what happened to Karen?" one message read, followed by a string of laughing emojis. Others chimed in, finally sharing their own grievances. She did the same thing to the Johnsons last year. She called the police on a kid's lemonade stand once. She tried to get my Christmas decorations banned because they were too ethnic. The dam had broken. Then the video took off online. News stations picked it up, leading with sensational headlines, "Trespassing Karen gets green with envy." Karen's real estate firm was forced into damage control mode as their social media pages were flooded with green emoji comments. Clients started pulling out of deals, questioning whether they could trust an agent who couldn't even respect private property. In a desperate attempt to salvage her reputation, Karen recorded a tearful video claiming she was simply trying to maintain community standards. But the problem? She was still green. Under the harsh glow of her bathroom lighting, her skin had yet to fully return to normal, making her look less like a concerned citizen and more like a very bitter, wicked witch of the West. The internet did not take her seriously. Karen's attempts at damage control only backfired. Her husband, once a respected businessman, was overheard at his golf club lamenting, "Do you know how hard it is to close a real estate deal when your wife is literally green?" 2 weeks later, a for sale sign appeared in front of Karen's house. Michael never gloated. He didn't have to. The neighborhood had changed. People who once avoided eye contact with him now stopped to chat. Mrs. Rodriguez, who lived across the street, brought him a batch of homemade empanadas. "I should have spoken up sooner," she admitted. She reported my garden gnome to the HOA last year. Michael's backyard, once the center of conflict, became the heart of the community. He hosted real gatherings with invitations, safety rules, and his famous grilled ribs. Kids splashed in the pool, parents laughed under the shade, and for the first time, the neighborhood truly felt like home. And the small framed photo near his pool gate? A keepsake from that unforgettable day. A reminder that sometimes karma just needs a little push. 2 weeks after the infamous pool incident, a for sale sign appeared in front of Karen Thompson's house. The sight of it should have brought Michael Carter a sense of triumph, but as he leaned against his back porch, watching movers haul furniture into a waiting truck, what he felt was something else, something deeper. Relief. Not just for himself, but for the neighborhood. For months, Karen had tried to paint him as the problem. She had spread rumors, filed baseless complaints, and even gone so far as to sabotage his property. But in the end, the truth had won out. The security footage, the viral video, the public humiliation, it had all unraveled the illusion of control she had once wielded. And now, as she climbed into the front seat of her car, her face no longer green but her reputation permanently stained, Michael simply lifted his glass of lemonade in a silent farewell. The moment she drove away, it was as if a weight had been lifted. Almost immediately, the neighborhood began to change. People who had once avoided eye contact now waved as they passed by. Conversations that had been kept behind closed doors spilled out onto sidewalks and front yards. It turned out Michael wasn't the only one Karen had tried to intimidate. The Johnson family next door finally shared how she had once tried to get their children's basketball hoop removed, claiming it lowered property values. Mrs. Rodriguez, a retired teacher, admitted Karen had reported her Christmas decorations for being too ethnic. "I should have spoken up sooner," she told Michael, handing him a warm plate of homemade empanadas. "But I'm speaking up now." And that was the real victory. Michael's pool, once a battleground, became a gathering place. That Labor Day, he hosted a proper backyard barbecue, one with real invitations, actual guests, and a sense of belonging that had been missing for far too long. Parents laughed under the shade. Children splashed happily in the pool, and for the first time, Michael felt like he wasn't just living in this neighborhood. He was part of it. One evening, a visitor noticed a small framed photo near his pool gate. It showed a group of people running through the street, their skin a vibrant shade of green. "What's this?" they asked with a chuckle. Michael just smiled. "A reminder," he said, "that karma has a way of making a splash." 1 year after Karen Thompson's chaotic departure, the neighborhood had transformed into something Michael Carter never could have imagined. It wasn't just the absence of her presence. It was the way the air felt lighter, the way people lingered longer in front yards, the way neighbors who once kept to themselves now greeted each other with warmth. The tension that had once gripped the community, cultivated by Karen's quiet manipulation and entitlement, had dissolved, replaced by a sense of camaraderie that had been missing for far too long. Michael's home, once the center of a battle he never asked for, had become the heart of the neighborhood. His pool, once a symbol of Karen's audacity, was now a place of shared laughter and summer memories. Families gathered, children splashed under the sun, and invitations to Michael's barbecues became the most coveted events on the block. The irony wasn't lost on him. Karen had spent months trying to make him feel like an outsider. She had called the police on him, spread rumors, and tried to turn the HOA against him. She had fought to isolate him, but in the end, all she had done was bring the community together, just not in the way she had intended. Michael often found himself reflecting on how everything had played out. He never set out to humiliate her. He never wanted the viral video, the public embarrassment, or the downfall that followed. But he also knew that standing his ground had been necessary. If he hadn't documented everything, if he hadn't refused to be bullied into silence, she would have continued her campaign of harassment, not just against him, but against anyone she deemed unworthy of their place in the neighborhood. Now, as he sat on his back porch, watching the Rodriguez kids take playful leaps into the pool, he knew he had done the right thing. The new family that moved into Karen's house fit in seamlessly, an interracial couple with twin daughters. They brought a warmth and openness that the neighborhood welcomed with open arms. Their girls had joined the local swim team, and Michael, without hesitation, offered to help them practice on weekends. He had seen enough injustice in his years on the force to know that not every story ends in fairness. But this one felt different. Sometimes justice didn't come in a courtroom. Sometimes it came in small moments, like watching neighbors reclaim their voices, seeing children play freely, or sharing empanadas over stories of resilience. Near the pool gate, a small framed photo hung quietly, its presence subtle yet powerful. It was an image that had become legend in the community, a group of people, mid-spring, their skin tinged green under the Georgia sun. When visitors asked about it, Michael never gave a full explanation. He simply smiled and said, "That's a reminder that karma always finds its way." And with that, he leaned back, took a deep breath, and enjoyed the home he had fought to protect. Standing up with dignity, a life lesson in resilience. Life often presents challenges that test our patience, integrity, and sense of belonging. Michael Carter's story reminds us that true strength isn't found in retaliation, but in standing firm with dignity, intelligence, and grace. When faced with discrimination, unfair treatment, or those who seek to diminish us, the most powerful response is not anger, but preparation and quiet confidence. For many older adults, this lesson is especially resonant. Whether dealing with changes in our communities, unfair biases, or simply navigating a world that sometimes overlooks experience and wisdom, we must remember that respect is not demanded. It is earned through our actions. Michael's ability to remain calm, gather evidence, and let the truth speak for itself is a strategy we can all apply in our own lives. Moreover, his story teaches us the importance of community. By standing up for himself, he inspired others to break their silence and come together. In a world that often feels divided, we should never underestimate the power of unity, resilience, and a well-placed reminder that karma, in its own time, as a way of restoring balance. A serious-looking black police officer wearing black gloves and a black mask is pouring a mysterious steaming liquid from a large white container with a skull and crossbones warning label into a swimming pool. The background features a stone wall and trees with no leaves. The image has a dramatic and slightly ominous atmosphere. A bold red arrow points to the container, emphasizing the warning label. Large yellow text at the bottom reads, "Let's see her swim now," in a dramatic font.